It is the 16th of June 2023, and this date, the 16th of June, is celebrated annually in South Africa as a public holiday known as Youth Day. In this short video, I'm just going to explain why the 16th of June is known and celebrated as Youth Day. And the short answer to that question is that the 16th of June 1976 is one of the most important turning points in the country's history, and it was initiated by school children. Had those school children not done what they did on June 16th, 1976, the history of the country could be completely different. Their peaceful march against being forced to learn half their high school subjects with Afrikaans as the medium of instruction initiated the sequence of events that led to the collapse of the apartheid state. From our modern day perspective, if we look back, we might take this for granted. But at the time, apartheid seemed like an impregnable force. In 1960, Sharpeville massacre happened, and immediately after the Sharpeville massacre, the state responded very effectively in crushing the liberation movement. And by 1964, liberation leaders in South Africa had either been arrested, life imprisonment, or sent in exile. And from 1964 until the mid-1970s, it looked from the perspective of the apartheid state that apartheid was going to be something that was going to work. The state had taken for granted that black resistance against apartheid had ended. They were now implementing their policy of relocating South Africa's African population into separate Bantustans, separate from white South Africa. And it looked like this would continue, this would be the status quo. They had a very powerful military, they were one of the strongest forces in the continent, and it seemed like it would be impossible to bring a change to this. There were cracks below the surface that were also important, but from the surface it looked like apartheid was an invincible force. But those school children on the 16th of June 1976 actually ended up initiating the events that broke this seemingly impregnable force. So why was this the case? And what exactly did they do? Something that's important to also mention whenever talking about the Soweto Uprising is that even though on the surface it looked like the liberation movement had come to an end, the top leaders in the two leading liberation movements during the 1950s, which was the African National Congress and the Pan-African Congress, they were, as I said earlier, either arrested or in exile. And now a new vacuum of leaders would emerge, a younger generation of leaders. Steve Biko was very influential, and Steve Biko's message of black consciousness, from today's vantage point, it might not be that easy to appreciate how significant this was, but at the time it was very significant. What was black consciousness? It was the idea to how does a country like South Africa exist where a minority of the population is able to rule over the majority. And for Steve Biko, it was because black people in South Africa had come to accept what was being enforced upon them. In 1953, the government had passed the Bantu Education Act. Bantu Education Act sought to restrict the quality of education provided for black children, increase the quantity, but to make black children useful in a white South Africa, where there were certain jobs which were reserved for whites and blacks would provide menial jobs. And that was the purpose of it. But for Steve Biko, blacks needed to be proud of being black. Black should not be something to be ashamed of. And he initiated this, him and other leaders in student organizations initiated this concept of black consciousness. Do not see black as being something, as a limitation, as an absence of whiteness, but see it as something to be proud of. And that was very motivating to young school children. Now, apart from the decision to force all African children in South Africa to learn half their high school subject with English as the medium of instruction and the other half in Afrikaans, there was other factors which led to the Soweto Uprising. And this was the fact that Bantu education also led to a situation where schools were very under-resourced. Classrooms were extremely overcrowded. There was a lack of qualified teachers. There was absolute poverty in some of the urban areas for Africans in South Africa. This was adding to the children's frustration. So then when they get told that that they were now going to be forced to learn half their high school subjects with Afrikaans as the medium of instruction, which was very difficult. As it is, they had to learn their high school subject with English, which was also a challenging language, but they could understand the value of learning English. But now they're being forced to learn half their subjects in Afrikaans, which was perceived as them as the language of the oppressor, the National Party who created apartheid in 1948. This was very frustrating for them. And the teachers who had to teach them were not fluent in Afrikaans. So they decided to take matters into their own hand and initiate a peaceful march in Soweto. The police opened fire on the children, and they killed Hastings Ndlovu and Hector Peterson. Hector Peterson, when he was shot dead, a reporter named Sam Nzima took a photograph of this. And this was very, very dangerous for Sam Nzima to take such a photograph. It would also put a threat on his life. But he nonetheless took this photograph. And when this photograph made its way onto newspapers and went international, and the international community could see what was really going on in South Africa, this was a turning point. The children of that day fought against the apartheid state. The apartheid state opened fire on them, live rounds shooting children. The apartheid government's stance up until this point was that apartheid was working in South Africa, and that black people liked apartheid in South Africa, that they accepted it, and there was only a group of trouble-causing communists who stirred up challenges. And people like Nelson Mandela, they would label as being a communist, a trouble causer, who doesn't represent the people. But when the children decided to take matters in their own hand, put their lives on the line, it shows that apartheid was not working in South Africa. And the fact that the police had to shoot children also showed that the international community that apartheid was not working in South Africa. It galvanized the children, and it led to them not only having hatred now for the Bantu education, but for the whole oppressive regime. During that day, they fought against the state, they fought against the police. The official state numbers was that 176 were killed. The numbers are probably much higher than that. But after this whole anger spread countrywide, and there were similar demonstrations in other parts of the country. These children would now revive the liberation movement, and they also forced the international community to take note. And what happened after June 16th, 1976 is ultimately what revived the liberation movement and brought about the end of apartheid. And that is why it is celebrated annually as Youth Day in South Africa.